Thank you, Mark. Thank you, everyone, for this kind invitation to be here and be with you on Trinity Week, or should I say hashtag Trinity Week, and such an illustrious group. I recognize that as the person that probably needed most intro, and certainly not a person who's been a journalist previously. Actually, I do want to ask you to take your mind back 20 years, if you would, for those of you who were around 20 years ago. I was a senior fresher in college here. My mind was filled with John Hagan's Economy of Ireland class. I was a boisterous Students' Union activist, and I was getting ready for summer with the Irish Times. And I actually had a terrific time working for the then and still sports editor Malachi Logan. And had I taken him up on his kind offer to come back, I wonder what my perspective would have been today. But instead, that's not quite how the cookie crumbled, and I guess the vantage point that I have comes from a couple of things. Initially, moving across to London and working in investment banking, and working for JP Morgan for almost a decade, and then with some lucky timing, ducking away before it all went a little bit crazy, really to re-find the inner lefty in me and spend time working with many great causes, charities, social enterprises, foundations in the UK and Ireland, around the world. I lived in Mozambique for quite a while, and actually learning firsthand some of the incredibly high impact work that they did, social impact, environmental impact, often with some of the very best stories to tell, but often a lack of time, resources and money preventing them to do so. And most recently kind of bringing both those sides together to help to set up and run jointly with a fellow friend from Trinity as well, a company called Lightful that helps charities and social enterprises to use technology in a more impactful way. And so my talk tonight does think about the role of news in the age of social media, but a little bit, as Mark has done, I think it's important that we reflect on this visceral notion of social media itself. I guess my journey since college is kind of interesting, thinking back. We used to queue for the computer lab. There was no Wi-Fi password to ask for. We didn't have laptops clicking away in lectures. Mobile phones had started to become more used, although then again so were pagers. Email, we were the first year to get email as a normal thing. And media-wise, we, at a discount in the Students' Union shop, used to pay for our newspapers. And Sky News was just getting going, so this idea of 24/7 news cycle was becoming a thing, although thankfully that horrible breaking news banner didn't yet exist. Moving to London, then, email, text, the mobile phone, social media certainly became a way to engage, to connect, to learn, and it definitely feels like there were simpler times. And a little bit like Mark has done, but obviously in nowhere near as a direct, engaged way, I think it's important that I want to reflect back onto those times where social media was much more of a peer-to-peer tool, people sharing stories, good, funny, indifferent, oversharing, and so on. But this idea of a decentralized tool, it's also been captured in a wonderful book called New Power, was really what gave so much of its power. Mark spoke about, of course, the Arab Spring, of the Green Revolution. In 2011, Saudi Arabian women using Twitter to gain the access to Drive, which is finally long overdue and thrilling to see has taken place, Occupy Wall Street. And of course, we saw young Irish people using the hashtag #HuntToVote during the marriage equality referendum. I think it's also important to remember that we also got used to the fact that social media and a lot of technology was free. Facebook, Twitter, Google, YouTube, news sites like Huffington Post, existing sites, TED Talks, Wikipedia, you name it, that has kind of become the norm with which we exist. And we'll talk about Professor McElroy's free lunch point in just a moment, because we know that two big realities hit. The first, from the platform perspective, is the commercial reality. Those companies, many of which I just mentioned, need to monetize their work. There are millions of people telling you their most intimate, asking the most intimate questions, sharing their personal likes, dislikes, preferences. I think it's important that we also acknowledge that our consumer society reality set in as well. Sales, marketing, advertising, smart people starting to understand how to convert data into money and also into power. And so what happened, of course, if we were unwittingly the sellers of our data and data became the new currency, who were the buyers? Well, the buyers, there was some legitimate direct activity, this idea of being served content that interests you, directly sharing that. We can talk about these ideas of the flip side around bubbles and echo chambers. I think it's important to engage. Legitimate third-party interest as well. If you show an interesting topic, X, you might be interested in Y as well. But of course, we then really saw the nefarious activity and this pretty grotesque information that's coming out with regard to Facebook and Cambridge Analytica. And the reason I say Facebook and Cambridge Analytica is that actually what Cambridge Analytica were doing at one point was engaging in a loud engagement and making calls on Facebook's API that were actually within the terms of reference of what they could do. Completely outrageous. And we also saw the excessive listening and this kind of idea of cross-pollination. I don't have a better word for it, and I couldn't find one either, of what we were doing online that got kind of sold. You check something on Instagram, you watch a video, you use your Google Maps, all of these elements of what we have both on our smartphones and also on desktop, seeing that this information started getting sold to companies and the highest bidders who were then ready to advertise to us. And all of this, of course, before artificial intelligence and the Internet of Things has really become a thing in our daily lives, and it's going to happen really fast. So I think, as we've seen with particularly Cambridge Analytica, which does feel like the tip of the iceberg, we are at an enormously dangerous point when it comes to this age of social media, as we're calling it tonight. ISIS recruiting terrorists on social media, the alt-right spreading downright racist, hopefully that's not the alt-right, Steve Bannon, no.
Mark Zuckerberg.
Exactly. Tom, well, okay, let me not say what I was going to say. So yes, the alt-right spreading downright racist and outrageous work, promulgating their views and news and fake news. I live in London, and we're seeing more noise around the role social media has played around increasing knife crime, and seeing the murder rate now go higher than we have in New York. Despots, fractured societies, things spiraling out of control. And yet, I'm an optimist. I'm an eternal optimist. And so I've been thinking ahead of this conversation, how do we try and get things back on track? So tonight I'd like to set out 3 things that I think we can do that actually take us onto a brighter path. Not black mirror, but maybe what I like to think of as bright mirror. And maybe get the arc of the moral universe to bend once more towards justice. So 3 things. First, I believe we need to get politicians and people in positions of power not to just say, oh, I don't get it, oh, I don't get social media, I don't get Snapchat, when they're probably adding you on LinkedIn at the same time. It's imperative that they engage intellectually with these conversations. These male parents, still congressmen, they're asking questions, asking about, if I send an email through WhatsApp, what data do you collect? Sorry, it's just not good enough. And data and metadata is something I referred to a few times now. This technology is progressing so fast. It's something that people in positions of power absolutely have to engage with fast. I believe we also need to look back. Brexit, I mentioned I live in London, tipped for the political scientists, tipping the median voter, 635,000 votes that swung it. We absolutely have to demand that something needs to happen, probably for another session around well, who cares what I think perhaps, but what we believe as a society needs to happen, given what's happened, the US election of Trump, elections in Kenya, Kenyatta, Nigeria, good luck Jonathan. Look what's happening at the present in real time. I guess it's not just the past, the abortion referendum coming up. Do we know what activity is happening? What's the potential impact that it has? And crucially, of course, looking forward, helping to regulate technology. Regulation is an easy word to throw out, good, but what does that actually mean? And also informing and empowering citizens to ensure that they've opted in, that we see, and by the way, we've seen very positive movement when it comes to the EU, and GDPR legislation is coming into effect next month when it'll be enforced, and the UK is adopting it even post-Brexit. It's critical that that has to happen, and it has to happen meaningfully, and it has to happen fast. Secondly, I also believe we need to fundamentally tackle this issue of an ever-increasing consumerist society. The evolution of Facebook and social media has been this ability, as Mark was talking about, to understand this metadata. It's not just that you like chocolate, but it's that you like chocolate, you maybe tweet about chocolate, or maybe you share a post about chocolate. Then people understand that you do that. Maybe you end up sharing fake news, then you start getting served. There's this whole intricate element that it isn't that you get served an ad, but the complexity of this, where we absolutely need to understand how that data is being collected and then being sold off. Advertising is something that actually hasn't been spoken about much in the last couple of months as the Cambridge Analytica news has broken. If we look at the evolution of newspapers, and I look forward to Olivia's comments, of course, very shortly, free paper is now much more in existence. And a big part of that financial model is that advertisers can do it. We see it on TV. This person is more likely to drive a Lexus, and that people who watch that show are more likely to drive a Volkswagen Golf. But technology has changed this in a massive way. And it's based on much more sophisticated targeting of ads that has unquestionably gone too far. Do we want our kids on YouTube watching videos that are doing this cross-pollination with what their parent was looking at on Amazon the previous day? What does that say about our society that that's even a thing that we should be talking about? I think then we also have to take ownership that we have to recognize that there is no free lunch, honorary PhD or otherwise. But moreover, actually, when it comes to engaging in our digital footprint, and we know that this isn't always the case. If for those working who use CRM systems like Salesforce, or for those of you who engage with software as a service models like even Netflix, where you understand that there is an element of understanding who the user is versus actually selling off our data. And thirdly, is the reason I probably feel most optimistic, is that decentralization is happening again. It's happening quietly, it's happening loudly, and in particular it's happening with civic society, grassroots movement, and I have the privilege of working with and partnering with hundreds of them that are starting to do this again. Around the world, we of course saw the hashtag he for she, calling out sexual discrimination and harassment, and saying that hashtag time is up. How powerful has it been over here to watch what's happened with a group of teenagers in the States suffering from seeing their friends being murdered and calling this hashtag right to march, using social media to mobilize millions, and the powers that be not knowing how to react. In the UK, hashtag Project 84 is run by a wonderful charity called Calm that's breaking the taboo about talking about male suicide, where 84 men commit suicide every week in the UK. In Ireland, we're seeing the As I Am Challenge, hashtag As I Am Challenge, building a more inclusive and understanding society for those who have autism. And what we've seen at Lightful in February was we spearheaded a movement to, what we did was hashtag Reclaim Social. We had 17 million impressions, really captured the zeitgeist, where we saw tens of thousands of messages sent, where we said enough to the trolls and the bots and the haters, but actually we want to amplify the stories of those causes having this highest impact, and that social media can actually play a role in doing just that. The impact of this, of course, given the sector that I work closest with, is enormous. Grassroots organizations, small organizations, and larger organizations can not just raise more awareness for what they do, but they can also raise more funds. They can use technology and social media to close that feedback loop, not be interrupt marketing, but share impact of where your donations went, increase empathy, increase understanding, use this more decentralized network to amplify their voice, drown out those haters and trolls. And by seeing those strengthened relationships, doing two things. One, seeing closer relationships between citizens and donors and those causes, but also two, generating more income for those causes to build bridges with those people who are feeling most marginalized and have been such a big part of what we've seen in this age of austerity, Brexit, Trump, and so many other areas. And so while the future of news in the age of social media is challenging, and it's difficult on which path we take ahead, I do want us to take more control of our news and recognize that the social media does not exactly equal the technology companies that have taken us to this point. I do want us to pay for our news. I do want our authorities to understand what has happened and what they can do to stop what's happening. I do want us to authentically address this consumer society that's a thing. And I kind of want to have this top-down pincer movement with the bottom up for us to support these grassroots organizations to see how we can amplify their voice and reclaim social. And in conclusion, given the times are stark and how painful it has been to watch Mark Zuckerberg's testimony and read so much about what's happening and laud so much of this wonderful news that The Guardian and others are doing in calling truth to power, I've decided to turn to who else but Seamus Heaney. And I want to end with a few words of his that I feel really hold true with how I look at the world ahead of us today. He says, history says don't hope, but then, once in a lifetime, the longed-for tidal wave of justice can rise up and hope and history rhyme. So I say, let's do it. Thank you very much.